Hey guys, tonight we're walking through narrow, crooked streets where every brick seems to hum with old secrets. You're in Amsterdam, but not the one you know. No neon signs, no canal cruises with overpriced cheese trays, just a cold wind curling through alleyways, carrying the smell of peat smoke, salt herring, and damp wool. It's the 1600s, and this city is quietly exploding into a superpower. You pass candlelit windows, some glowing like little beacons, others shuttered tight, guarding heat and privacy. And yet, even now, there's something peculiar about how these homes are built. So tall, so thin, so stacked. Like someone forgot to include a width option on the blueprint. You squint up at the rooftops. They seem to stretch toward the sky, leaning just slightly toward the canals, and inside, people climb ladders instead of stairs. Attics become bedrooms. Every inch is precious. It's a city of vertical ambition. And here's your sleepy reality check. This empire of bricks was once so obsessed with light and money that they actually tried to tax sunlight. Yes, sunlight. You probably won't survive this logic, but that's okay. We're here to unwind, not rage against historical absurdities. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it over there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward down a cobbled street that never seems to dry. Water clings to everything, to your boots, to your coat, to the low fog resting on the canal. This is Amsterdam's heartbeat in the 17th century, damp, bustling, and somehow still charming. The Dutch Golden Age is in full swing. Ships bob in the harbor, their hulls groaning with goods. Spices from the East Indies, sugar from the colonies, bundles of linen, crates of tulip bulbs more valuable than gold. You pass traders yelling numbers at each other like they're arguing in code. One man is literally throwing money into a canal. Don't worry, it's fake coins. He's making a point, a dramatic one. Behind all this noise, the city's spine is shifting. Building booms surge like tidal waves. Amsterdam is growing at a rate that today's city planners would call, "Please slow down." But there's no time for slow. The Dutch have declared war on space, on flat land, on inefficiency. If the ground won't grow, they'll build upward. And so the stacking begins. The houses you pass are comically narrow, some just over 2 meters wide. The front doors look like broom closets, but then the house rises 4 or 5 stories tall, with hooks dangling from the gables for hauling up furniture, because guess what doesn't fit up those winding staircases? Literally anything wider than a chair. This wasn't just about style. It was taxes, of course. In some Dutch cities, property taxes were based on the width of a house's facade. Want to pay less? Build skinny. It's the real estate equivalent of squeezing into skinny jeans to get a discount at the bar. Historians still argue whether this width-based tax was enforced strictly across all cities or more of a trend that turned into myth. But there's no debate that the architecture responded dramatically. And so did the people. You catch glimpses inside. A merchant brushing dust off his ledgers, a child asleep in a rope-strung cradle, a maid polishing brass candlesticks like they're museum artifacts. Every window becomes a small theater of Dutch domestic life. Light is treasured here, not because it's romantic, because it's functional, vital, and soon taxable. At first, it's about natural order. More windows, more light. More light? Better chance of not bumping into your spinning wheel or misreading that shipping invoice that determines whether you become rich or ruinously bankrupt. But the Dutch don't do things halfway. Cleanliness becomes a national identity. Glass gets cleaned obsessively, sometimes daily. A smudge is practically a scandal. Your neighbor might talk, and nobody wants to be the smudgy glass family. You feel it already. Light isn't just something that happens. It's curated, controlled, collected. You start noticing how the canal houses are angled to catch every possible beam. Some streets feel like sun traps, others like eternal shade. And you know what that means in a place like this. Inequality begins with sunshine. One house gleams like a mirror in the dawn light. Another, across the way, never sees more than 15 minutes of sun per day, thanks to the looming warehouse next door. And yet, both families pay the same for firewood, candles, everything else. That doesn't seem fair, does it? Enter the taxman. Not yet, but he's coming. For now, just observe how this city, for all its wealth and reason, is beginning to shape itself around the most primal human craving, light. Not warmth, not comfort. Just that golden glow that makes the dust in the air sparkle and tells your body it's still daytime. And it isn't just the rich chasing it. You pass a carpenter working by a narrow window, a mirror angled beside him to double the illumination. A baker with his ovens pushed up against a wall of glass. Even a woman knitting by the stairwell where the light barely reaches. Her hands work by feel, not sight. There's a silent war happening here, and it's not over borders. It's over brightness. Over the geometry of how much sun you're allowed to have and who gets to decide what it's worth. And as you step onto the next street, narrower still, with laundry lines sagging above and children shouting something incomprehensible in Dutch, a strange feeling settles over you. This city is already preparing for a war on light. And you, sleepy traveler, are right in the middle of it. You're still in Amsterdam, and the buildings just got taller. The canal beside you reflects narrow facades that look like bookmarks standing upright. It's hard not to imagine the city as a giant library of brownstone spines, each home a story, each window a sentence, each rooftop a final punctuation mark curling skyward. And all those rooftops, they don't just reach, they strain, tilt, lean forward ever so slightly, like curious observers peeking over your shoulder as you walk. Some of them even have pulley systems attached, those little wooden arms extending like fishing poles with iron hooks dangling from them. You squint up. That's not decoration. That's infrastructure. Remember those spiral staircases too tight for anything wider than your elbow? Yeah, Dutch architects did too. So they started hauling everything up, sofas, mattresses, entire barrels of pickled herring, by rope, through windows. Because when the walls won't budge, you use the sky. It all feels like an upward negotiation with physics. You pass a home just 4 meters wide and 5 stories tall. Inside, a staircase runs like a ribbon through it, weaving past closets pretending to be bedrooms and kitchens the size of modern microwaves. Space isn't wasted, it's worshipped. You want a bigger house? Then make peace with vertigo. But why? Why did they build like this? Simple. Sort of. Tax codes. In the early 1600s, as Amsterdam boomed, property taxes in some cities, like Leiden and Alkmaar, were calculated based on facade width. Not floor area, not number of rooms, not the height, just how wide your house looked from the street. Want to pay less? Make your house as thin as a saltine and pile floors like a game of Jenga. Historians still argue whether Amsterdam itself ever had a strict facade width tax like those other cities. Some say it was never a formal law here, just a design trend that spread like gossip among architects trying to game a broken system. Others insist it existed, quietly enforced, a tax by design principle that helped birth the long, narrow trap houses we still see hugging the canals. What we do know, people believed it was real. And that belief shaped how entire neighborhoods were built. You can almost feel the pressure in the air. Stack smart, stack narrow, and don't forget the pulley for your piano. And then came the brick. Ah yes, glorious brick, the Dutch version of wallpaper and currency rolled into one. You reach out, run your hand along a wall. The bricks are small, tightly packed, arranged in flawless Flemish bond. There's no randomness here, no room for it. Even the patterns are tax efficient. Why small bricks? Because smaller bricks meant lighter loads, easier transport by boat, and less strain on weak soil foundations. The entire country, you remember, is basically floating on sand and prayers. And then there's the matter of foundations. Amsterdam homes sit on long wooden piles, driven deep into the wet earth. The deeper the pile, the pricier the build. So when you're building tall and narrow, there's a whole financial dance involved. Fewer piles, closer spacing, tighter quarters, thinner walls. The house becomes less like a fortress and more like a balancing act. You peer into a ground floor window and see a narrow hallway leading to a staircase with stair treads so steep they might as well be ladders. A cat is curled up on a windowsill, absorbing the only sunlight that slinks into the house at this hour. That sunlight, you'll come to learn, is precious, maybe even taxable. You take a breath and let that thought settle in your chest. The very concept of sunlight, something that costs no one anything, something that spills from the sky without discrimination, could be commodified. And all around you, people are already reacting to that idea. Subconsciously. A home with a wide window is flaunting wealth. A home with small, high windows might be hiding from both sunlight and tax inspectors. You turn down another canal street, this one quieter. The kind of silence where even the bicycles go slower. There's a merchant hammering something in a tiny workshop. Light filters through a prism of narrow windows above him. The glass is slightly wavy, the old kind, where imperfections catch the sun like little fish scales. It sparkles, but only just. Because too much sparkle could mean you're rich, and if you're rich, someone's coming to measure your window and ask for money. You sit on a bench for a second. The wood is damp. Of course it is. Everything's always slightly damp here, but it doesn't bother you. It suits the story. As your eyes adjust to the rhythm of the city, you notice something else. Symmetry. Not artistic, but financial. Windows spaced evenly, almost like they were measured by some invisible grid. One per room. No more, sometimes less. It's architectural restraint, fiscal prudence, Calvinism in wood and stone. And yet, paradoxically, the Dutch love their windows. They clean them with a fervor bordering on obsession. They decorate them, they dress them. But they also use them strategically, placing mirrors to bounce light further into the room. Some windows are split horizontally. Half opens for air, half for gossip. You glance at one particularly clean pane and catch a reflection of yourself. Distorted slightly, like a ghost in another timeline. A 21st century insomniac eavesdropping on 17th century tax policy. You're starting to understand the rules of this place. Not the spoken rules, but the silent ones, where a narrow house signals thrift, a wide window signals wealth, and everyone's playing a game of, how much light can I afford? It's not paranoia. It's math. It's not just architecture, it's strategy. And somewhere beyond these canals, in some back office of a government building, someone is already drafting a new kind of tax. One not on property, but on potential, on possibility, on photons. But that's for tomorrow. Tonight, you just keep walking. The bricks shift gently under your feet. A lantern flickers. Somewhere, a church bell tolls. And you realize that every step forward in this story will only lead you deeper into a world where daylight itself became a luxury. You wake up, still dreaming, still here, on the edge of a canal, the water glinting like old glass, just barely catching the morning light. And that's when you start noticing it again. The windows. They stare back at you like eyes. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Some tiny and fogged over, some gleaming and scrubbed clean by hands that have done it 1,000 times before. And all of them arranged just so, neither random nor accidental. Because in this strange, soggy city, windows are more than glass. They're declarations. A wide window says, I can afford this much light. A narrow one whispers, I'm careful. Don't look too hard. A painted-over pane might shout, I don't want to pay. You're in the middle of a long-standing Dutch love affair with natural light, one that was tender, a bit obsessive, and sometimes downright bureaucratic. Let's step inside. The house is small. You bump your elbow on the doorframe, and the floorboards creak beneath your feet. There's a long hallway, almost too narrow to walk without turning sideways, but at the end of it, like a prize, is a window. The glass is rippled and faintly tinted like melted ice. A lace curtain flutters gently, and the air smells of soap and warm milk. You sit on the windowsill and watch the dust motes swirl. They dance in the sunlight like secrets that finally feel safe to show themselves. And you realize, this spot, this window, this moment, it's everything. Because here in the Dutch Republic, light is status. Not wealth in the obvious sense, not coins or land or livestock, but a more refined, almost spiritual kind of prosperity. The kind that says, I've carved out a place where light can find me. So people began to count windows, not just for the views, but for what they meant. How many did your neighbor have? Did your aunt's new house have stained glass? Did the mayor's home reflect the morning sun or block it out with heavy drapes? And that's when the whisper of taxation slithered in. Quiet at first. Just a thought in some council chamber or accounting room. If people value light this much, someone said, probably while twirling a quill pen, maybe we should charge them for it. But even before the tax came, the culture was already preparing. Windows were framed meticulously. Glass was polished with vinegar and linen cloth. Houses were aligned along canals in ways that maximized exposure. And some architects, cheeky geniuses that they were, began adding decorative shutters that mimicked real windows, just to keep up appearances. Historians still argue whether this early obsession was more about beauty or surveillance. Because remember, these are Protestant houses, modest, upright, suspicious of vanity, but also wide open. Often, there were no curtains at all. The logic? If you've got nothing to hide, why hide it? You lean forward, peer into another window across the canal. A woman is scrubbing her floor, on hands and knees, by the light of a single clean window. Her eyes flick up and catch yours for a second, then back down to the scrub brush. It's not a private moment. In this city, nothing truly is. And yet, that doesn't stop people from trying. As light becomes currency, people start to guard it, strategically, socially, and soon financially. The Dutch begin to speak a new architectural language. Transoms above doors, split sashes, diamond-paned leaded glass, and eventually the holy grail of domestic design, the tall central front window. Large enough to let in sunlight, small enough not to seem extravagant, positioned just right to show off a tidy room, a nice tablecloth, maybe a Bible. Something respectable. Something taxable? It's around now that the lines start to blur. Is this a design trend or a loophole? Is this window for function or show? Did your neighbor just add that second floor window? Or has it always been there? You step back out onto the street. The air smells sharper now, like early spring and wet stone. People pass you, carrying baskets of eel and cloth bolts and kindling. A child tosses a pebble into the canal, and a pigeon tries to drink from a puddle on a roof tile. You glance up and see a strange window. It's horizontal, wide, and set unusually low to the ground. A merchant, maybe? Or just someone very proud of their floorboards. It's all starting to feel like a game. And the game is simple. Get as much light as possible, without tipping off anyone who might start asking questions, or taxes. You pass a new building under construction. The scaffolding is crude, but you notice the windows have already been framed. Even before the roof goes on, the light is being measured. Someone whistles from above, a builder hoisting bricks with a pulley. He waves. You wave back. For a second, it feels like a moment from a painting. And you realize paintings did try to capture this. Artists like Vermeer, Rembrandt, and Pieter de Hooch loved their windows. They used them as stage lights, not just for realism, but for drama. You've seen those paintings, a woman reading a letter beside a glowing window, a man gazing through panes at the sea, a servant pouring milk in a sun-drenched room. But here's the twist. Those rooms, often darker than they looked. The painters exaggerated the light. They needed to, because the reality was often a lot dimmer. Still, the idea remained. More light equals better life. And just like that, glass became aspiration. It wasn't just about letting in the sun, it was about showing the world that you could. You sit on a stoop beside a bakery and someone hands you a small pastry. It's warm. You don't ask what's in it. You just eat it. And as the sun slides down behind the rooftops, you realize something quietly profound. In this city of light chasers, shadows always follow closely behind. You wake to a sound, soft but deliberate. Wood on stone. Scratch, scrape, stop. A man is measuring a window. You watch him from across the street. He's dressed in browns and grays, with a satchel slung over one shoulder and a long wooden rod in his hand. He taps the edges of the frame, makes a note in his ledger, then moves on without so much as a nod. Behind him, the shutters slowly creak closed, like eyelids embarrassed to be seen open too wide. This is it, the moment the absurd becomes real. You, dear traveler, have arrived at one of the strangest episodes in European tax history, the taxing of sunlight. To be fair, they didn't write it down exactly like that. No law said, "Thou shalt pay for beams of sunshine." That would have been poetic. No, this was drier, bureaucratic. It was a window tax. In the Dutch context, it started small, city by city, case by case. It wasn't just the Netherlands either. As the 17th and 18th centuries unfolded, parts of Europe became obsessed with measuring access to the sky. The logic? More windows equals more wealth, more taxes. Simple enough, right? But you feel it immediately. That kind of logic is a slippery slope. The taxman didn't care whether your window actually let in light. He didn't care if it opened or was painted shut. If it was visible, countable, taxable, it was fair game. You trail behind the inspector now. He's stopped at a Grand Canal house, 3 stories, ornate trim, big windows. Too many windows. He sighs as if he already knows he'll be writing a long list. And he does, scratching line after line into a little book. The homeowner watches through lace curtains, frozen. It feels invasive. Because it is. Historians still argue whether the Dutch implementation was ever as rigid as in places like England or France, where entire buildings were bricked up to avoid tax. But we do know this. By the late 1600s, cities across Europe had found themselves in the same strange debate. How much is sunlight worth? And more importantly, who gets to decide? You walk further now, past buildings where some windows look fake, painted illusions on plaster, so symmetrical they're almost too perfect. You pass another home with obvious bricking where glass used to be, a smooth rectangle of sealed-off light. These aren't just architectural choices. They're responses. Resistance. You duck into a side alley where the houses are shorter, older, and somehow more defiant. These people, shopkeepers, cobblers, widows, don't have grand foyers or spiral staircases. They have ladders, they have soot, and now they have window taxes. So they improvise. Some build blind windows, a facade that appears to have a window but doesn't. Some split one window into three using framing tricks to confuse the taxman. Others hang thick fabric behind the glass so the window appears opaque, unworthy of taxation. You stop at one especially clever house. The windows are narrow, irregularly spaced, and tucked beneath wooden eaves. From the front, it's impossible to tell which are real. The entire building is playing a shell game with the sun. It's genius, and a little sad. Because when the tax on windows arrives, it doesn't just land on the rich with their glittering glass palaces. It lands on the poor too. Harder. Rich families can afford both the tax and the luxury of light. They don't have to choose between windows and food. But the poor? They brick up windows to save a few guilders, and with them goes the warmth, the air, the sun. You pass a tenement where 3 upper windows are sealed with mismatched bricks. The rooms behind them are now cave-like, stale. Someone's coughing behind one wall, a dry, hacking sound. The irony is hard to ignore. The tax meant to squeeze more out of the wealthy ends up dimming the lives of everyone else. You pause at the edge of a canal bridge, look down at the water, and see your reflection, fuzzy, doubled by ripples. Like the city, you're trying to hold 2 thoughts at once. 1, this is brilliant policy. Easy to enforce, visibly measurable, tied to a luxury. 2, this is a ridiculous tragedy, charging people for the most basic element of life. Still, the window counters continue. They carry little wooden poles, or even paper stencils. They use maps, sketches, gossip. Some cities develop full registries of fenestral openings. It's all very serious, very official, very absurd. You hear a story whispered from a corner bakery about a man who once removed his entire 2nd floor just to avoid paying window tax. Another about a widow who slept in a hallway because her only bedroom had the most windows. And then there's the tale of the merchant who argued that the window on his roof didn't count, because only cats used that room. Historians can't verify all of these. But then, again, history is full of strange footnotes like this. True in spirit, if not in detail. You find yourself smiling anyway, because somehow this is both deeply human and painfully silly. You walk back toward the city center now. The sun is higher, and light streams across the cobbles in slanted golden beams. Some houses soak it in shamelessly. Others avert their eyes. You realize that windows have become symbols now. Not just architectural elements, but moral statements. Do you flaunt your fortune in glass? Or cover your pains in modesty and soot? Do you let the light in, knowing someone might knock with a bill? Or do you seal your home in shadow, safe from scrutiny? The tax doesn't just touch your home. It touches your identity, and as you round one last corner, you see it. A narrow house with a single, perfect window. The glass is clean, the shutters open just enough. Behind it, a woman is sewing by the light. No curtains, no shame, just a quiet dare to the taxman. She doesn't flinch. You turn a corner and walk into the sunlight, real, warm, glorious sunlight, spilling over the rooftops like melted butter. And somewhere in that buttery glow, a question rises like steam from cobblestones. Why tax light anyway? It feels ridiculous, doesn't it? The sky is free. The sun rises whether you pay for it or not. You don't stick your hand out the window and receive a bill with every golden beam. So how did anyone convince themselves this made sense? Let's pull that absurdity apart like stale bread. First, imagine a world where tax collection isn't digital or automatic or hidden inside your grocery bill. It's visible, tactile, blunt. Your cows are counted. Your salt is weighed, your soap is taxed by the lump. You start to see the pattern. If you use it, and people can see you use it, it's taxable. Enter the window. By the 17th century, city governments were desperate for revenue. Wars weren't cheap. Bureaucracies needed feeding. Roads needed mending. Or, more often, tax collectors needed new coats. So cities looked around and asked, what else can we charge for? And someone, probably the kind of person who alphabetizes their turnip sellers, said, windows, because they're easy to count, publicly visible, and in theory, a proxy for wealth. After all, more windows meant a bigger house. A bigger house meant money, and money meant taxes. It was the same twisted logic that led to chimney taxes, and hearth taxes, and beard taxes. Yes, beard taxes. You remember that one, don't you? Russia, under Peter the Great. If you wanted to keep your beard, you had to pay a fee and carry a little copper token stamped with an image of facial hair. Imagine pulling that out at parties. The deeper you dig into history, the more bizarre it gets. In France, there was once a tax on salt, so vital that it sparked riots. In England, wallpaper was taxed, prompting people to paint patterns directly onto their walls to dodge the charge. There was even a tax on buttons in Prussia, which reportedly made tailors cry and nobles very annoyed. So, by comparison, windows weren't that weird. But still, there was something particularly cruel about taxing light. Because light wasn't just wealth, it was health. It kept your food fresh, your mood steady, your lungs dry. It helped you sew, read, raise children. And as doctors began whispering new ideas about air and disease, miasmas, stagnation, ventilation, light became something close to medicine, which made taxing it feel wrong. But to the city treasuries, it was just math. You pass a public notice nailed to a wooden post. It's crinkled and half-faded, but the script is ornate and self-important. It lists the new levy. So many guilders per visible window, adjusted for size. There's even a fee structure for ornamental panes. Because, of course, there is. You walk on. Past a pub with fake windows painted onto its exterior, framed in thick black lines, like a child's sketch of a house. You nod at a man carrying what looks like a mirror, and realize it's a light box, a primitive trick to reflect sunlight into a dark home. A poor man's window. The shadows lengthen, and the tax grows heavier. It's not just about counting windows anymore. It's about shaping behavior. People start building differently. Architects are hired not just for beauty, but for their ability to design within tax constraints. One clever builder angles the side of a house so that only one window is visible from the street, while 3 more are hidden in the alley. Another designs his home with a central courtyard that floods the inside with light, invisible from the outside. It's a game now. A deadly serious game. Because the cost of losing is darkness. Historians still argue whether the window tax achieved its goals. Did it raise significant revenue? Or did it quietly create a generation of half-lit homes and squinting children? Some records suggest tax avoidance was rampant. People bricked up windows overnight before inspectors arrived, then reopened them later with wooden panels or false shutters. One mayor supposedly covered his windows with cloth and claimed they were temporary holes awaiting glass. Nice try. You pause at a bakery, drawn in by the smell of cinnamon and yeast. Inside, the baker works by candlelight, not because he's poor, but because his largest window faces an inner courtyard and doesn't count toward the tax. He catches you looking and grins. You want a window with your bread? That's extra. You laugh. He's joking, mostly. You chew slowly as you walk. The bread is sweet and dense, a little burnt on one side. Like the city itself. Everywhere you look now, light feels heavier, more precious. You pass homes where the curtains are drawn, not for privacy, but because the family can't afford the accusation that too much light suggests too much money. It's a strange sort of paranoia, afraid not of thieves, but of sunlight snitches. And yet, this paranoia shapes the city. Whole neighborhoods evolve in response. Streets grow narrower, alleys tighten. Buildings lean over canals, not just for convenience, but to shade each other, a collective shrug away from scrutiny. You find yourself thinking of the sun differently, not as a warm friend, but as a nosy tax auditor. One beam too many, and someone's knocking. And through it all, the city smiles politely, because that's the Dutch way. Smile, then resist. Comply, then subvert. Pay the tax, then build a loophole tall enough to live inside. You sit on a stone bench at the edge of a plaza. The sun is setting now, turning the windows into little mirrors. They catch fire for a moment, glowing gold and red, then fade into silhouettes. It's beautiful, it's fleeting, and for a long time it was billable. You rise from the bench just as the last sliver of sun disappears behind a chimney-stack skyline. And with the fading light, a question lingers like the smoke from a doused lamp. What would you do if every ray of sunlight cost you money? Well, if you were Dutch in the age of the window tax, you might start getting creative. You turn into a narrow street, one of those back alleys where everything feels like it's been scaled down for a different species. The houses lean in close enough to gossip about each other. Here, the games begin. A curtain flutters open on the second floor, then closes sharply as the taxman passes. You watch him move like a ghost, clipboard in hand, counting windows like sins. He doesn't knock. He just observes, notes, moves on, and the curtains follow, snapping shut like guilty eyelids. This is where the true genius of Dutch ingenuity starts to shine. Ironically, in darkness. You stop at a 3-story home with no front-facing windows at all. None. It looks blind. But as you walk around the side, there it is. A full wall of glass, basking in sunlight, hidden from the street like a secret garden. The family inside enjoys daylight. The tax office enjoys confusion. You smile. Welcome to the golden age of dodging daylight fees. Some residents resorted to shutters left permanently closed, insisting the windows behind them didn't count. Others smeared panes with paint or soap to make them look unused, because only usable windows were taxable in some cities. A few even installed fake bricking with seams so subtle they could remove it after inspection, like reverse burglar bars. But sneakier. Historians still debate just how much cheating went on. Some think it was rampant. Others say the inspectors were savvy and didn't fall for it. But the evidence is baked into the bricks. All over old Dutch towns, you find ghost outlines, where a window once lived, but was sealed away, like a vampire never to be mentioned again. You pass a house with one such bricked-up opening. The outline is faint, but the difference in mortar is unmistakable. Someone used cheaper filler. It's like a scar, a reminder that light once lived here, but economics evicted it. Inside, you hear voices, faint, cheerful, laughter, even. So not all was lost. The tax gave birth to a low-key arms race of avoidance, and where there's a loophole, there's always someone ready to crawl through it. You walk into a fabric shop next, just a peek. Rows of heavy drapes hang from ceiling beams, swaying gently as you pass. The owner, a man with spectacles the size of soup spoons, nods knowingly. Curtains are cheaper than taxes, he says. And that's another tactic, concealment. If you couldn't afford to remove a window, maybe you could just hide it. Or claim it wasn't a window at all. Oh, that's a ventilation gap. That's decorative glass. That one's for the cat. And of course, there were the mirror tricks. You saw it earlier. Those angled reflectors used to bounce light deeper into dark rooms. They were brilliant, quite literally. A tiny sliver of sun, redirected 2 or 3 times, could brighten a space while keeping actual window count to a minimum. But not everyone played fair. You stop at a tavern with a shady reputation, both literally and figuratively. They've been accused of bribing inspectors. One man allegedly paid in gin. Another offered fresh tulip bulbs, which at the time could buy a horse or a small house, depending on the week. Corruption? Certainly. Surprising? Not remotely. Because when you start taxing sunlight, you're not just taxing luxury. You're taxing daily life. You're taxing the act of reading by a window, the luxury of growing herbs indoors, the ability to see your sewing needle without lighting a candle that costs money. You're turning light into guilt. And humans don't like feeling guilty for something so natural. So they rebel in quiet ways. You wander into a church, cool, dim, echoing. The windows here are immense, with colored glass filtering the sunset into sacred hues. No taxes here. This is divine light, untouchable. But even in churches, the suspicion crept in. Some city councils proposed taxing church windows too, arguing they should set a public example. The backlash was swift. You can imagine the sermons. Render unto Caesar, unless Caesar's asking for sunlight. Outside again, the streetlights are being lit one by one. Tall posts with glass lanterns swinging like pendulums. A lamplighter tips his cap as he passes. His job is safe from taxes, for now. You lean against a wall and look up. There's something comforting about how ordinary people fought back. not with protests or riots, but with fabric, mirrors, bricks, and grit. Their homes became puzzles, their windows, riddles. Each curtain was a shrug, each bricked arch a smirk, each mirror a middle finger to the taxman. And yet the city never stopped breathing. Even in its dimmest rooms, it found ways to laugh. Children still played in narrow alleys, lovers still met in attic nooks, grandmothers still peeled apples by slanted beams of borrowed light. Because that's what people do. They adapt, they dodge, they giggle in the shadows and say, "No, officer, that's not a window. It's an air hole for my parrot." You chuckle. The air smells of coal and baking bread again, and the lesson sits gently in your chest, like a warm pebble. If you try to price sunlight, don't be surprised when people start building in the dark, and smiling anyway. And morning again, and the city wakes under a thin fog. You can barely see across the canal as you step carefully onto slick cobblestones. Somewhere, a church bell tolls a lazy 7, and just above the rooftops, barely, a sliver of sky peeks through the haze. You think back to all the clever citizens hiding their sunlight like smuggled silk. But now let's meet the ones sent to find it. The tax inspectors. They are not, as you might imagine, villains twirling mustaches. They're bureaucrats. Men with coats too long, boots too short, and expressions that always look mildly disappointed. You know the type. They don't yell, they just sigh, and then fine you. You turn a corner and spot one now. He's standing on a crate to get a better view of a second-floor window. His hand traces the air as if outlining a crime scene. A child throws a pebble at him from a window 2 houses over. He doesn't look up. He's been doing this a long time. These men, officially called window inspectors, were armed with ledgers, measuring rods, and an almost unnatural patience. Their job was to walk from house to house, often uninvited, and catalog every taxable opening they could see from the street. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they were allowed inside, which led to all kinds of trouble. You pass a doorway where the bricks above seem oddly patchy. A woman sweeping her stoop notices your gaze. "He said it was a window," she mutters, "but it's been sealed since my grandmother's time." You nod. She shrugs. "They find me anyway." It's not just numbers anymore. It's memory versus measurement. And when those don't agree, the inspector wins. You stroll through a narrow block in the Jordan district, poorer than the Grand Canal houses, but richer in stories. Here, resistance turned inventive. Not just bricks and curtains. Not just angled mirrors, but whisper networks, clever lies, and even trained rats. Yes, rats. You pause. The story goes that a man in Delft taught his pet rat to tug on a thread tied to a curtain whenever it heard footsteps outside. The curtain would fall across the front window just in time to hide it from the approaching inspector. Do we believe this? Not entirely. Do we want to believe it? Absolutely. Because nothing says Dutch resilience. Quite like a tax-dodging rodent. You pass a tavern where stories like that are born. Low ceilings, dark beams, a haze of tobacco. A man at the bar sees you and taps his mug. "You know they once tried to tax staircases?" he says, eyes twinkling. "That's why I only have ladders." You don't know if he's joking. But this is what happens when a government gets too creative with taxes. Every architectural oddity becomes suspicious. Every design quirk, a potential crime scene. One inspector reportedly carried a mirror on a pole to angle around corners and check for hidden panes. Another used a telescoping rod to measure upper-floor windows from the street, earning him the nickname the Sky Prober. That one stuck. And these weren't just isolated cases. In cities where the tax was enforced strictly, like London and Paris, inspectors became infamous. Households timed their cooking and cleaning around inspection hours. Children were told to close shutters the moment they saw the man with the book. It was part cat and mouse, part stage play, and entirely exhausting. You pass a tailor's shop with windows suspiciously shaped like triangles. Why? Because the law only counted rectangular openings in that region. So people got creative with geometry. In another town, someone built what looked like windows but were actually glass-fronted cabinets embedded in the wall. From the outside, they looked like light-filled rooms. From the inside, they held pickles. Genius. Salty genius. Historians still argue about the limits of this creativity. Some believe local officials turned a blind eye. Others insist the enforcement was brutal. especially in poorer districts where even one taxed window could mean the difference between bread and hunger. One surviving record lists a widow fined for 3 excessive pains in her attic, a space where her grandchildren slept. She paid the fine, then bricked up the room. You feel that one in your bones. But not all inspectors were cruel. Some understood. One man, known only as Conrad the Mild, was famous for accepting barter in lieu of fees. A loaf of rye bread here, a few apples there, even a live chicken once. People loved him. The government didn't. He was reassigned to counting chimneys. You cross a footbridge now, watching barges drift beneath. A family of ducks floats past, oblivious to taxes. Lucky creatures. You hear a conversation behind you. 2 old men arguing about whether bay windows should count double. One says yes, one says only if they stick out past the eaves. They've probably had this argument for 30 years. And you wonder, did anyone ever stand up and shout, "This is madness"? They did, occasionally, but quietly, carefully. You don't protest taxes by smashing windows, not unless you want to pay double. So instead, people used humor, stories, games. One man painted a trompe-l'oeil window on his wall, so convincing that the inspector tried to knock on it. Another woman wrote poetry mocking the tax and pasted it to her shutters. But in the end, the inspector always returned. Maybe not every week, maybe not even every year. But eventually there'd be that familiar knock, that slow walk down the street, that quiet counting from the corner. You take a long breath and step into a courtyard washed in soft morning light. It's quiet here, safe. And in that stillness you realize the great irony. The more governments tried to tax sunlight, the more people cherished it. They cleaned their panes until they gleamed, tilted mirrors to bounce it deeper, whispered stories by it, laughed in it, resisted in it. Because you can tax a window, but you can't tax what it means to sit by one with your tea, your book, and your stubborn, untaxed joy. The air changes as you pass the edge of town. It smells different here, less like coal and wet brick, more like pine and pasture. You've wandered into the countryside, or maybe just the fringe of city limits. Either way, the buildings begin to sprawl. They breathe. And for the first time in a while, you see something shocking. A house with too many windows to count. No shutters, no curtains, just open glass, sparkling like a row of polished teeth. You blink. They're not hiding the light out here, because out here the tax doesn't reach. You step off the cobbled road and onto packed dirt. A breeze pushes the tall grass sideways, and a cow gives you a slow, unimpressed glance. In the distance, you hear the creak of a wooden shutter, not closing to dodge the taxman, but simply flapping in the wind, carefree. This, sleepy traveler, is where the window tax fever starts to spread beyond the Dutch borders. Beyond canals and counting sticks, into the rest of Europe. It doesn't happen all at once, but once the Dutch flirt with the idea, the others take notes. France, England, various German states, they all look at the window tax and go, that's clever. Mildly cruel, but mostly clever. You cross into a mental version of France now. Paris in the early 18th century is grand and glistening, and like any good city trying to recover from the financial black holes of war, it's desperate for revenue. So in 1749, France officially introduces its impôt sur les fenêtres, the tax on windows and doors. Yes, and doors. Because why stop at daylight when you can also charge people for entry and exit? You stroll past a mansion where 3 windows have been replaced with tiny paintings. You hear someone mutter behind a hedge, "Too much air means too much tax." They laugh, but it's a weary laugh. Then comes England, the overachiever of weird taxes. The English window tax officially begins in 1696 under King William III. It was pitched as a substitute for income tax, which nobody liked. So instead, they went after windows, reasoning that richer people had more of them. More glass, more guineas. Reasonable? In theory. But the consequences? Grim. You walk the streets of old London now, fog thick enough to chew. The buildings are bricked, broad, often soot-stained. And yet, whole rows of townhouses have bricked-up gaps where windows should be, like missing teeth in a grin that once sparkled. Why? Because the tax rate went up the more windows you had. Have 10 windows? Pay a moderate fee. 12? More. 20? Now you're just flaunting it. So people started removing windows. Literally. And in England, this wasn't just a quirky trend. It was epidemic. Homes were darkened. Hospitals, too. Even prisons. Entire wings of workhouses were built with fewer windows to cut costs. You pass one such building, a large brick block, imposing square, lifeless. It looks like a cake that someone forgot to frost. The only light comes from a few tiny slits near the roofline. A single bird sits there, perfectly still. The result? A generation of airless, sunless, and deeply unhealthy homes. Even as doctors began to understand the importance of fresh air and daylight in preventing disease, the tax policies encouraged the exact opposite. Historians still argue whether the window tax contributed to the spread of tuberculosis, rickets, and other diseases. But you don't need a medical degree to feel the wrongness of it. You walk through an old tenement and gag slightly at the smell. Mildew, damp wood, something like boiled cabbage and sadness. A child coughs. A woman sits on a stair, knitting in what little glow spills from a single window 3 floors above. This is what happens when governments price the sun. And let's not forget Prussia. The Prussians, ever eager to out-bureaucrat everyone, implemented window taxes in various regions at various times, often bundled with levies on luxury items, dogs, even ceilings. That's right. In some places, the height of your ceiling was taxable. You step into a parlor in Berlin. The ceilings are suspiciously low. A chandelier hangs just above head height, swinging like a threat. All around you, architects are adjusting. Builders are adapting. Some homes are designed with interior courtyards, allowing natural light without visible street-facing windows. Others develop clever filtering systems, skylights that don't count, window panes hidden behind decorative slats. You glance up at a roof with a tiny dome, just big enough to let in sun, but not wide enough to be taxed. Below it, a man reads under a beam of light so thin it looks like it was poured through a straw. But even with all this imitation, people aren't happy. Pamphlets circulate, satirical poems, political cartoons. One particularly famous etching shows the sun wearing a bureaucrat's wig, scolding a man for having too much cheek to enjoy daylight without license. And that becomes the public mood. Dark rooms, bitter jokes, windowless dreams. You wander through a square where the buildings are lovely, symmetrical, and blank. No shutters, no sparkle, just pale walls staring back at you like faces that forgot how to smile. And through it all, you start to hear whispers, movements forming, small protests, petitions, architects lobbying for exemptions, doctors urging reform. Because when half your city lives in shadow to avoid a tax, even the sunniest disposition grows cold. You step into a cafe. It has 3 windows and proudly displays a placard. We pay our light. It's not bragging. It's defiance. And as you sip your coffee, bitter and perfect, you look out at the street and think, how strange that something as soft as sunlight once started a war of bricks, beams, and bureaucracy across a continent. The cafe smells of roasted chicory and old paper. You linger a while, watching the way the sunlight lands gently on the wooden table, casting a long, dappled shadow across your cup. A man 2 seats down opens a newspaper, muttering something about bad air and blocked windows. You've heard it before. But now, something clicks. Tax the window, and you darken the room. Darken the room, and you endanger the lungs. It seems obvious in hindsight. But in the 18th and 19th centuries, it took decades for cities to connect those dots. And when they finally did, panic followed. You step outside into the golden afternoon light and feel it on your skin like silk. Then imagine a life without it. In the poorest districts of London, Paris, and yes, even Amsterdam, homes with bricked-up windows became the norm. Dark, cramped, unventilated. Rooms where food spoiled, lungs ached, and minds dulled. And slowly, the physicians began to notice. One British doctor called them lung traps. Another labeled them sick houses. A Dutch pamphlet warned, you cannot tax the air and expect men to breathe freely. Doctors began reporting correlations between windowless homes and a host of diseases, tuberculosis, influenza, eye strain, even depression. At the time, the science was murky. Germ theory hadn't yet solidified. But the instinct was clear. People were getting sicker in the dark. You walk now into an old hospital ward, rebuilt, but modeled after its original form. The ceilings are low. The walls are thick. There are windows, but too few. The beds, lined up like stiff paragraphs in a bureaucrat's report, sit in shadows. A nurse once wrote that in the winter months, we see our patients only by candlelight, unless someone opens the door at just the right angle. It's a haunting sentence, And yet the tax persisted, because light was still framed as a luxury, not a necessity, a privilege, not a right. And governments weren't eager to lose revenue, especially during wartime. Still, the public grew restless. You overhear a young woman on a tram grumbling about her cousin's child getting rickets from living like a mole. Her companion nods grimly and offers a boiled sweet. Neither of them seems surprised. You continue walking. On the outskirts of town, new buildings have begun to sprout, different buildings. Taller, wider, glassier. They gleam, they promise air, they whisper health. These are the model homes, part of a growing reform movement. Architects and doctors working together to create what they called rational dwellings. Spaces where light could pour in freely, where fresh air could circulate, where curtains were a choice, not a tax dodge. Some cities offered window tax exemptions for hospitals, schools, and orphanages. Others reduced rates for poorer families. A few even experimented with entire tax-free housing zones to test the effects on public health. Historians still argue whether these reforms came from compassion or from fear. Fear of epidemics, of rebellion, of crumbling labor forces too sick to work. Probably a bit of both. You turn into a side street where a group of children play with hoops and sticks. Their faces are smudged, their knees scraped, but they shriek with laughter. You glance up at the building behind them, and for once every single window is open. Not just unlocked, wide open. Curtains billow out like lazy flags. Sunlight pours through them like an apology. This wasn't always the case. You step into a working-class flat, now preserved as a museum. The main room is smaller than your average kitchen. One window, one stove. 6 people once lived here. The guide speaks softly, almost reverently. They used to ration candle use, 1 per week. So when the sun went down, they stopped reading, working, speaking. You run your hand along the windowsill. The wood is grooved where someone rested their elbows, watching the sky. Or maybe waiting for it. It's easy to forget how darkness wears on the mind, not just the body. It closes you in, shrinks the world. And when it's forced upon you by law, it becomes more than a nuisance. It becomes a kind of civic cruelty. You pass an apothecary next. In the window, tonics, powders, and a hand-painted sign that reads, "Sunlight is the best cure, but we sell the second best." It's a joke. But also not. One English physician famously prescribed 2 hours of light per day with or without medicine. Dutch doctors echoed him, urging patients to sit near glass whenever possible. Not because they understood UV rays or vitamin D, but because light made people feel better. They were right, even if they didn't know why. In fact, entire health retreats emerged around this philosophy. Sun parlors, light baths, reflecting mirrors installed in alpine lodges to maximize daylight exposure. The body craved what the tax code had taken away. You sit again now on a bench warmed by late sun. The sky stretches out above you in that sleepy, honey-colored glow only found in old cities and old stories. A woman sits nearby, her eyes closed, face tilted upward. She hums. A man beside her reads a book titled The Benefits of Natural Ventilation. Even the pigeons look slightly enlightened. It's a soft, collective defiance, a reclaiming. And for just a moment, it feels like the light is winning. Because no matter how many taxes they invented, no matter how many windows they counted, no matter how much shadow they imposed, the sun still rose, and people still turned toward it. The bench is cold now. The sun has dipped below the rooftops again, and a long shadow stretches across the square like a black ribbon unspooling. You watch as the last golden patch of light slides off a third-floor window and vanishes. Just like that. This part of the city feels older. Not quaint. Forgotten. You walk slowly. The buildings here are squat and hunched together, as if they've grown ashamed of how little light they offer. The windows, what few remain, are small and set high. Some have been bricked up entirely, others blacked out with thick paint or soot. They aren't homes anymore. They're hollows. This is where the window tax hit the hardest. The poor houses. Places where the city stashed its most vulnerable residents. Widows, orphans, the sick, the elderly, the unemployed. Anyone who couldn't pay, couldn't work, or simply had nowhere else to go. And as daylight became a meterable commodity, these people were priced out of the sun. You enter one such building, now preserved as a historical site. The interior is dim even during the day. The air tastes like chalk and old wood. A volunteer hands you a small candle, and you hesitate. You realize this isn't just for mood. It's because without it, you won't see a thing. The walls are stone. The ceiling's low. The floor is swept, but it creaks with memory. You pass rows of bunks, each separated by thin curtains. A ledger on the wall lists names, dates, and cause of entry. Some have small X marks beside them. Some have notes. Fevered. No kin. Too many children. And all of it exists in darkness. It's here, in places like this, that the window tax stopped being about money and started being about dignity. Because these people weren't trying to game the system. They weren't installing trick mirrors or bribing inspectors. They simply couldn't afford the light. And so they lived in dim corridors, breathing stale air, folding clothes by candle stubs, whispering at each other because voices carry differently when your walls are heavy with shadow. Historians describe these spaces as internally collapsed, not in terms of structure, but of spirit. You walk into a room called the day cell. Ironically, it has no daylight, just a single barred window near the ceiling. It's less a source of light and more of a cruel reminder that light exists somewhere else. There's a bed frame, no mattress, a tin bowl, a comb, and a Bible. You turn the pages, surprised they haven't cracked from dryness. A line is underlined in faded ink. Let there be light. You breathe out through your nose, hard, because the irony of it all sticks to you like dust. That this, the removal of light, was sanctioned, approved, administered. That someone, somewhere, sat at a desk and signed a form that sealed a window because the numbers made more sense than the people behind them. You step back out into the hallway and pass a plaque. It quotes a reformer from the early 1800s. We have built houses to hold the poor, and in doing so have taught them how to disappear. You walk back outside, and the light feels too bright now. Unfairly generous. It reflects off the cobbles, blinding in its excess. And just across the street, a newer house glows like a lantern. 3 windows wide, clean, open, framed in lace. A cat sleeps on the sill, basking in the very thing so many others once had to live without. You can't help but think. Even now, even today, this disparity remains. Modern cities still carry shadows of this tax. You see it in high-rise apartments with sun-facing views that cost more, in zoning codes that limit building height but never question how many windows you can afford, in homeless shelters lit by fluorescent strips, not sunshine. And back then, the divide was starker still. The wealthy paid the tax, or didn't care. Their homes glowed regardless. Their parlors had velvet drapes they chose not to use. Their stairwells glittered with chandeliers. Their mirrors doubled daylight for sport. You enter one such home, now a museum. The walls are butter-colored. The chandeliers sparkle. The windows are enormous, so large you could step through them. You imagine the original owners sipping coffee by the glass, looking out over the canal, watching the poorhouses shrink into dusk. It's not jealousy. It's just light. And that was the great divider, the line between brightness and shadow, between a room you could breathe in and a room you might wither inside. You sit on a padded bench beneath one of those grand windows and close your eyes. Behind your lids, light still filters through. You remember the bricked-up homes, the whispering stairwells, the children who grew up squinting. You remember the woman in the tenement, knitting by the weak beam of morning. You remember the sick houses, the widow's attic. And you realize the window tax wasn't just a footnote. It was an eraser. It erased faces from windows, voices from doorsteps, light from lives. But in this museum, in this moment, it's being remembered, which means someone is putting the pieces back. Outside again, the city is dimming. Lamps flicker on. The breeze carries wood smoke and the smell of frying onions. Someone laughs far away. The sun is gone, but it gave what it could before leaving. And for those who never had enough of it, its absence was louder than any tax. Evening again. The city has softened. The edges of buildings blur. The canals reflect the sky in ripples like the surface of a spoon turned upside down. And you, still wandering, still watching, turn a corner and find yourself somewhere familiar but different. A studio. You didn't plan to come here, but it pulls you in. The space is quiet, spacious by city standards, and bathed in golden light from a high, wide window. The light falls with purpose, angled, deliberate, slow. It doesn't just illuminate, it defines. This is the studio of a painter. You don't know his name yet, but you've seen his work. The woman pouring milk, The girl with the pearl earring, the letter being read by morning light. Yes, you're in Vermeer's world now. And here's the twist. In an age when governments taxed sunlight, artists turned it into magic. While others bricked up windows or shuttered them in fear, painters opened them wider, on canvas. They stretched them, amplified them, made them into theatrical spotlights illuminating the ordinary. You sit on a worn stool in the corner. A palette rests on the nearby table, smudged with dry pigments, umber, ochre, ultramarine, the brush tips stiff like tiny brooms. And the window? Oh, the window, it's everything. Because artists didn't just use light, they fought with it. Quietly, elegantly. In their paintings, the poor still had sunlight. The seamstress still squinted into her needlework. The maid still polished the pewter under the watchful glow of early morning. And perhaps no one did it more slyly, more intimately, than the Dutch masters. Vermeer's rooms weren't real, not exactly. They were composites. Idealized spaces filled with poetic lighting that defied architectural limitations. The windows in his works always came from the same direction. Always clean, always generous. Historians still argue whether he painted from life or constructed these scenes like a director with a set. Was that window real? Did that light actually fall like that at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday in Delft? Or was it wishful thinking? You glance around. The floor is tiled in perfect perspective. The walls are pale, textured, slightly worn. You can imagine him standing right there, brush in hand, waiting for the right angle of sunlight before beginning the day's work. Because painters didn't have Photoshop. They had patience. They waited for the sun to move an inch. They watched shadows shift across fruit. They studied reflections in pewter. And in doing so, they captured something beyond image. Hope. Hope that even in the poorest corners of a city taxed to the bone, light might still break through. That a woman hanging laundry could still glow like a queen in silhouette. That a butcher's shop could be bathed in divine shadow. The irony? Many of these artists weren't wealthy. They too lived in cramped homes. Their studios were small. Some even had to borrow light, renting hours in well-lit rooms or using reflective panels made from polished tin. You leave the studio now and step into a gallery. The paintings surround you like windows into a brighter version of the same world. You see faces you've never met, bathed in light you wish you could touch. A bowl of fruit, a folded letter, a loaf of bread, all made luminous. But it wasn't just Vermeer. Rembrandt, De Hooch, they all turned sunlight into subtext. In Rembrandt's case, it was more dramatic. The beam slicing across a cheekbone, the divine spotlight hitting a sinner at just the right moment. He turned chiaroscuro into theater. And in a country half drowning in shadow, people craved that kind of drama. You walk past a canvas showing a tavern scene. Laughter, smoke, spilled drink. But what draws you in? The glint of light catching the rim of a tankard. A single beam cutting through the haze, like truth finding its way into the murk. Even when windows were scarce, painters gave us more than was architecturally allowed. They painted what should be there, not just what was. A single open window in a tenement meant you could paint 3. 1 candle became 5. A shaft of afternoon sun bouncing impossibly far into a dark hallway? Entirely staged. And yet, it felt right. Because it restored balance. Where the tax system dimmed lives, art relit them. You sit on a bench and watch visitors come and go. Some pause, some skim, a few stop in front of a painting and just... They don't say much. They don't have to. Because something inside them recognizes what they're seeing. Not just paint, not just skill, but a reminder of what it feels like to live in light. You remember something you read. That during the height of the window tax in England, one painter moved to a different borough just to keep his skylight. Another wrote to the tax board claiming his windows were spiritual, not structural. They denied the exemption. You chuckle. But the artists didn't stop. Because they were part of the resistance, too. A brush dipped in ochre, a shadow cast deliberately, a painting left on public display long after the candle had burned out. And here, centuries later, that light still glows. You step outside the gallery. The sun is almost gone now. Just a faint, peachy smear behind a row of chimney pots. But it's enough. Enough to outline the buildings. Enough to catch the gleam of a window pane. And enough to remind you that even when taxed, suppressed, or stolen, light finds its way back in. You walk with a different awareness now. After the studio, after the gallery, after all that golden painted sunlight, you can't help but look at the city like it's been artfully lit by some invisible hand. Every window is a brushstroke, every shadow a composition. But don't get too comfortable, because as with any great trick, there's always someone trying to game the system. You round a bend into an older part of town, one where nothing feels level. The houses lean at odd angles, staircases twist like question marks, and the windows are downright suspicious. One is cut in half by a beam. Another looks like a mirror until you realize it's glass painted black. A third is a triangle. A triangle. What you've stumbled into, friend, is not just a neighborhood. It's a gallery of tax-dodging architecture. Because as governments got smarter about taxes, people got smarter about loopholes. Enter the architects of mischief. By the mid-18th century, especially in places like England, France, and parts of the Netherlands, architects had a new client concern. Can you design my house to not be seen? Not disappear entirely, just seem less windowed. And that's where the real fun began. One common tactic: false walls. You pass one now, a building with what looks like a normal facade, until you step back and realize the front wall is detached. A decorative shell just a few feet thick sitting in front of the real house. It's beautiful. It's absurd. It's hiding 12 windows. Another trick? Blind windows. You spot them all over this block, painted rectangles with trim and sills, sometimes even faux glass reflections painted on. From the street, they pass the casual glance. But up close, they're just plaster and hope. Why bother? Because some tax laws only counted windows visible from the street. Hide them behind walls, around corners, or in courtyards. Taxmen can't see them, can't charge you. Simple as that. You step into a narrow passage between two homes. It's barely wide enough for your shoulders. And yet, there's a perfectly placed window halfway up one side. It catches the morning sun, faces no road, and smiles down at you like a secret. Welcome to the world of sunlight smuggling. Architects designed homes with light wells, open-air shafts, angled mirrors, and inset skylights, all intended to funnel light into places it technically wasn't allowed to reach tax-free. You pass one such home. From the street, it looks like a bunker. Inside, it's practically a solarium. Historians still argue how widespread these designs were. Some say they were rare and expensive. Others insist they were far more common, just hidden in plain sight. After all, who wants to advertise that their home is breaking light laws? You stop at an old stairwell that wraps awkwardly around a chimney. It's like someone stitched the house together using leftover plans. Why? Because chimneys weren't taxed in this region, so people built staircases into them. You can't help but laugh. But that's the thing about restriction. It breeds invention. And in an age of tax-based design, some of the strangest, smartest ideas were born. Some homes used internal glass walls, transparent partitions between rooms that let a single window illuminate multiple spaces without needing more taxable openings. Others built subterranean skylights, a small dome above ground channeling light into a basement workspace. And then there were the rotating walls. That's not a metaphor. Some records mention buildings with rotating panels, windows that could be turned to face inward or outward depending on whether the inspector was in town. A bit theatrical, yes. But theatrical is what happens when daylight has a price tag. You pass an old pub known locally as the Shutter's Bluff. Legend says it had a complex pulley system that let the bartender close all front-facing windows in under 10 seconds. Supposedly, it once fooled an entire audit team. Was that true? Probably not. Was it told proudly? Absolutely. You sit outside the pub, watching the lamps flicker on across the street. They glow softly behind stained glass, many of which bear strange, irregular shapes. Not for beauty, for tax evasion. In one city, octagonal windows were exempt. In another, windows under a certain square footage didn't count. In yet another, anything made of colored glass was not a true window. And so, homes began to look like abstract art projects, tessellations of rules and rebellion. Even building orientation played a part. Some architects designed entire rows of houses to face sideways, so the narrow ends pointed to the street. Fewer visible windows, less tax, more smug satisfaction. You walk through one such neighborhood. It feels off. like a painting hung slightly crooked. The homes don't present themselves. They turn away from you, like introverts at a dinner party. But behind their turned shoulders, bright rooms, quiet victories. Of course, not every workaround was legal. Some builders paid bribes to inspectors. Others simply refused to register their windows. A few went full rogue, installing windows after dark when no one could see them appear. In one case, a man reportedly disguised his upper windows as chimney vents. When caught, he claimed the sun heated the flue. You shake your head. But secretly you admire it, because this wasn't just greed. It was survival. These weren't aristocrats fighting for luxury. They were families clawing for light in a system that made seeing the sky an expense. You pause in front of a townhouse with mismatched brickwork, a clear patch where a window was once sealed. You know that shape by now. You know what it means. Someone used to sit there. Someone used to read. Someone used to smile at the light. And then one day, they couldn't afford it anymore. So they built around the law. They rewrote their floor plan. They obeyed, but only just. And in that small act of architectural defiance, they kept a little sunlight for themselves. You've walked through clever shadows, peeked into fake windows, and chuckled at chimney staircases. But now, as you wander farther into the 19th century, something starts to change. You feel it in the wind. Less playful, more tense. The bricks seem newer, but the mood is older. Heavier. The tricks are no longer cute. The loopholes are wearing thin. And across the continent, the public is starting to ask out loud, is this still worth it? You turn down a main street, wider than the others, more exposed. The houses here are different, less defensive, more open, like they haven't decided whether to hide or shine. One window has a crack in it, not from a stone, but from pressure, of time, policy, and quite possibly 100 years of someone leaning on the sill, waiting for common sense to catch up. It's not just the poor who are tired now. It's everyone. The merchants who have to budget for sunlight. The architects who run out of ideas. Even the inspectors who are starting to resent their own job titles. The government, once gleeful about the easy income stream, begins to feel the strain. Because clever citizens have become expert dodgers, and the costs of enforcement, maps, ledgers, staff, disputes, are starting to outweigh the glow of revenue. You duck into a tavern where a man is mid-rant, glass in hand. I paid 12 florins for windows I had bricked up last winter. He shouts. Did you tell them you bricked them up? Someone asks. No, he mutters, but still. Laughter, a familiar kind of bitterness, the kind that signals policy has crossed into farce. This is the turning point. You step back onto the street and catch sight of a pamphlet nailed to a lamppost. The title reads, Light Should Be Free. Below it, a drawing of a house with wings for windows, literally flying away from a tax collector with a net. It's satire, yes, but it's also protest. Because for the first time, window taxes aren't just architectural, they're political. Historians still argue which region broke first. France repealed parts of their window tax in the 19th century under increasing public health pressure. England held out longer, until 1851. And the Netherlands? Their policies varied, waxed and waned, often existing in fragmented, localized forms. But the arc was always the same. The absurdity reached critical mass. You pass a small city hall, plain, functional. Inside, a council meeting is underway. You peek through a crack in the door and hear it. We are taxing fresh air and visibility, gentlemen. Not wealth, not property. Visibility. The debate has reached the ruling class. Even members of parliament are admitting the tax no longer makes sense. One writes publicly that it's a stain on modern governance. Another calls it an ancient relic from a time when logic cost more than glass. You walk past a row of houses recently built. They're different. Taller, brighter, no fake bricking, no blind windows. Real glass, from street to roof. The kind of transparency that feels deliberate, like a victory lap. But there's tension still. Because repealing a tax isn't like snuffing out a candle. It's like turning a ship. You pass a bakery with a chalkboard outside. Fresh bread, warm light, no window fees. It's a joke, but it's also real. Because today that bakery has 5 street-facing windows. A generation ago it would have had 2, maybe none. And the city feels different because of it. People are walking with heads higher. Curtains are thinner. Even the architecture breathes more freely. You stop at a recently renovated tenement building. Once dark, once suffocating, now restored with rows of tall windows. The interior rooms are alive with movement. Someone's playing piano. A woman is dancing, barefoot. And you realize the repeal hasn't just returned sunlight, it's returned life. Still, the scars remain. You round a corner and see them. Those familiar bricked-up shapes, now preserved as part of heritage tours. They're almost quaint now, museum-worthy. But to the people who once lived behind them, they were real. They were airless. You overhear a tourist ask their guide, "Did people really live like that?" The guide nods. They didn't live in darkness. They survived it. You cross a bridge, slow and quiet. The canal below is glassy. The water doesn't move but reflects everything. And in that reflection, you see the houses with their true number of windows. Not hidden, not shameful, just whole. It took decades to undo the damage, to rebuild what was lost, to forgive the logic that once made sunlight a ledger item. But it happened. Not in protest marches or revolutions, but in meetings, architectural journals, public health reports, and 1,000 small, tired conversations that finally turned into laws. And when those laws changed, so did the city. You stop walking. Look up, a tall house, 4 stories. Every floor has windows, 6 across the front. Clean, open. You don't need to knock. You know what's inside. Someone laughing, someone reading, someone boiling tea in a shaft of afternoon light. Not paying for it, just using it. And for the first time in this whole long story, you feel something not so absurd. You stay there for a long time, just standing beneath that windowed house. It's not grand. It's not flashy, but it doesn't need to be. Its rows of sunlit panes say everything. We made it back to the light. And yet there's one more layer to this story, one that doesn't shine as brightly. Because just like old habits, old laws never vanish entirely. They leave shadows. You begin walking again, deeper into a newer district. The buildings are younger here, but the bones, oh the bones, still echo the past. You pass a modern apartment block. It's stylish, wide, expansive glass front. But your eyes squint anyway. Something feels curated. Too much glass here, not enough there. Balconies that jut out just so, casting shadows where there should be none. And that's when it clicks. We still design for light, but now we price it differently. You walk past a real estate office. Posters in the window show condos with proud bullet points. South-facing views. Full-length windows. Sunlight all day long. You lean closer to one. A 2-bedroom flat with premium natural lighting is priced significantly higher than one just 1 floor below. Same size, same shape. Different sun. Because even now, even without an official tax, light is currency. We don't measure it with a counting stick anymore. We measure it in rent, in access, in view premiums. In those architectural buzzwords we barely register. Airy, bright, sun-drenched. You step into a showroom. The salesperson greets you with a grin so polished you could use it to check your hair. Windows on 3 sides, he says, as if offering a secret. Is that unusual, you ask? Unheard of, honestly, and all south-facing. You nod slowly, remembering a time when windows on one side were cause for taxation, when south-facing meant more tax, not more luxury. The salesman continues, but his voice fades. Because you've started noticing other things, like how buildings are still coded, not by the number of windows, but by what those windows say about who lives behind them. You walk through a neighborhood of low-income housing. You see the difference immediately. Fewer windows, smaller panes, ground-floor apartments with bars instead of flower boxes. It's not a tax, it's a budget. The irony is thick. We no longer punish people for light, we just make it too expensive. And in some ways, that's even quieter. More invisible. You pass a school, built in the 1950s. A time when architects, finally free from absurd window taxes, decided to let in the sky again. The classrooms have full glass walls. A teacher draws shapes on the board while the sun dances across her desk. But right across the street, a newer school. More concrete. Tighter budgets. Narrow vertical slits instead of wide panes. The kind of windows that let in only what's absolutely necessary. No more. A design choice? Maybe. A financial one? Definitely. Historians still argue whether modern zoning policies are in some way the grandchildren of those old sunlight taxes. The codes are different. The language is slicker. But the results? Strangely familiar. You walk past a row of buildings with recessed windows, deep shadowed. Stylish, yes, but also cheaper. Less glass, less heat loss, fewer complaints about glare. You pass a sign on a construction site. Coming soon, luxury sky homes, sun above, city below. You already know which direction the windows will face and how much they'll cost. But then, just a block away, you turn into a courtyard. A small building. Modest, plain, but every window is open. No tinting, no privacy screens, just people, living, talking, letting the air in. A boy leans out with a juice box. A woman hangs a quilt. A cat suns itself on a ledge, blinking slowly, smugly. There's no sign out front. No price tag. Just light. The kind no one's counting. And that's when you realize the story hasn't ended. It's just shifted. The window tax may be gone, repealed, buried in footnotes. But the question it raised still lingers. Who gets the light? And the answer? Still evolving, still being built into blueprints, still hiding in floor plans, still glowing, just faintly, behind every premium listing and garden-facing unit. You keep walking, past the glow of office buildings, across neighborhoods named after trees, beside riverside condos with full-glass balconies and studio flats with only a skylight. Because even now, the city still wrestles with what light means, and who it belongs to. The city is quiet now, not the hush of sleep, but that deeper kind of quiet. The kind that comes when the day has finally given up its last flickers of sunlight, and even the buildings seem to exhale. You walk slowly, not because you're tired, but because you want to linger. This is the end of the path, but also somehow a return to where we started. You find yourself once again beside a canal, just like on that first evening. But this time, the darkness doesn't feel so heavy. There are lights behind every window, warm, golden, flickering like stories waiting to be told. You pause at one in particular. It's a simple window, nothing ornate. No curtains. A potted plant leans lazily toward the pane. Inside, an old man in slippers reads beside a lamp. He turns a page, scratches his chin, and sips something steaming from a mug. That's it. That's the whole scene, and it is, somehow, enough. Because now you know the history behind that window. You know what it meant to build it. To open it, to keep it. This story you've walked through, this long, winding, oddly bureaucratic tale of glass and tax law, isn't really about windows. It's about what they stand for. Freedom, access, health, beauty, and sometimes just a moment to sit in the sun and breathe without paying for it. You pass buildings with rows of bricked-up squares still visible, like scars that never quite faded, and others with fresh-cut glass gleaming like smiles. And then there are the in-betweens. The homes that kept their fake windows for aesthetic. The schools with skylights. The hospitals with mirrored atriums. The cities still debating height restrictions and shade lines and sunlight rights. Historians still argue whether we ever learned from the window tax. Whether we traded one form of access limiting for another. Whether we fixed the problem, or just shifted its shadow to a different wall. And maybe they're right to argue. Because while we no longer send inspectors door to door with rods and clipboards, we still make decisions about who gets to feel the light and who has to fight for it. But there's something else too, something that's never gone away. You see it in every small defiance, every flower box hanging off a railing, every rooftop greenhouse, every child drawing suns on fogged-up glass. We still believe in the power of light, and we still chase it around corners, through cracks, across oceans of time. You stop on a bridge and look down. The water below is black but calm, reflecting the world in crooked geometry. You catch your own reflection, tired maybe, but content. Behind you, a door closes softly. Someone pulls their shutters in for the night, but they leave a lamp on. You don't look back. You just keep walking. Your footsteps soft now, the city a little less strange, and the windows a little more personal. Because you know the story they hold. You've seen the dark behind them. And you've walked with the people who once had to choose between bread and daylight. But not tonight. Tonight, the light is free. Wind down. So now let's leave the city behind, quietly. The cobblestones fade under your feet, and the night stretches long and unbroken above you. The windows grow dim, one by one, like stars being gently tucked in. There's no rush, no more counting, no more tax collectors, just you, the sound of a slow breeze, and the steady exhale of buildings at rest. You feel lighter now, not because the story was short, it wasn't, but because it carried you somewhere soft. Strange, illuminated. You remember the clink of measuring rods, the creak of shutters closing, the laughter of children ducking under drawn curtains. You remember the architects with their clever loopholes, the artists with their impossible sunlight, the poor houses that fought for one more hour of warmth. And you remember that single perfect window, the one that stood open even when it wasn't supposed to. Let that be your final image tonight. A quiet room, a safe place, a little sun still clinging to the wall, no one knocking, no one counting, just stillness and breath. And maybe, if you tilt your head just right, the faint echo of a world where the value of light was never measured by coin or code, but by how it made us feel. Let that feeling carry you now. Let it wrap around your shoulders like a soft blanket. The night is here, and the windows are all closed now, but only because no one needs to guard the light anymore. Sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.